in this video, we are on the hunt for my childhood Nintendo 64 games. I've got a list of about 12 games that I absolutely loved to play back in the day, and we're gonna see if we can find all of them. This is the Oklahoma Gaming Frenzy. I wandered in here looking for games for the Nintendo 64 from my childhood. This first booth only had 2 games and didn't have anything worth it. And then I went to this next booth where I did end up finding Kobe Bryant NBA Courtside right off the bat. And this game was only $5, which is on my list, which is totally awesome. So for $5, I was going to grab that. Then I kept looking here and there and didn't find anything else. So all I ended up actually grabbing was NBA Courtside. But for $5, this game was definitely well worth it. If you're a fan of basketball or Kobe Bryant, playing this game is a ton of fun. I think this is a game that's going to be overlooked because it's a Nintendo 64 sports game. However, I have a fond memory for this game, so I can turn it on and play it and have no problem. But you do know going in it's a Nintendo 64 game. But that also means it's time to mark something off the list, and this is the whole list. We'll talk about more in a bit, but down at the bottom here I've got Kobe Bryant Courtside, so go ahead and mark that off, and let's go back to the game convention and see what else we can find. So I made my way to the next booth where I found one lone Nintendo 64 game that wasn't on the list. So I made my way to this booth where actually right off the bat I ended up finding Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. This is an absolute amazing game. If you've never played it, you definitely should. I kind of kept looking through here, again, trying to find another game that I can get from this vendor, but that ended up being the only one, and that is okay considering it is one of the better racing games on the system. Star Wars Episode 1 Racer is a ton of fun. They've remade this game, I think, for like the Switch and the PlayStation and the Xbox, so it's definitely an amazing game, and we all know it had to have been on this list for me to pick it up. So it's down here towards the bottom again where I have like cheaper games, I would say, and that is Star Wars Episode 1 Racer right off the bat. 2 games pretty quickly, and we've only spent $15, so we've got to find some more games though. So I continued on to this booth where I actually thought I might find something here. They do have Star Wars Episode 1 there on the table, but nothing else on my list. Then I saw over here they did have a few more in the glass case, but these are more expensive games that I'm not necessarily looking for, but they are absolutely amazing there. And then I left that booth and made my way to the Gaming Horde where they had a bunch of different games here. And I looked around in search of a game on my list. And that's when I noticed on the very top shelf, all the way to the left, a game that I was wanting to grab. And that ended up being Battle Tanks. This game is an absolute ton of fun. What more can you ask for from a game where you're just a tank blowing stuff up? This game is a ton of fun and definitely well worth it. I'm glad to have picked it up from the Gaming Horde. It's a local game store that I love to support, but that also means I can mark it off the list down here. It's one of those games I wondered if I would find it, and I'm really glad that I did. So I continued on through the game convention. I made my way to this table where I saw a lot of games, and I thought I would maybe pick one up here, but I kind of kept looking, and either the games that I wanted I already had, or they just weren't priced right, or something wasn't right here, so I didn't grab anything there. I did see some crazy Pokemon stuff and Nintendo 64 stuff there at this booth, but everything was way too expensive and none of the games that I was looking for. But then I made my way to this booth where I ended up grabbing Blast Corps for $15 right off the bat, and then Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. Both of these games are absolutely insane Nintendo 64 games. Those ended up being all that I got from this table, but Blast Corps is, again, another one of those games where you basically blow things up, and anything from this era that involved explosions when I was a kid, I was loving this. And then probably one of my favorite Nintendo 64 games of all time, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Now, I know this was on other consoles, but for me, this was on the Nintendo 64 when I played it as a kid. Absolutely amazing game, and I am glad to be able to grab my Sharpie and mark not one, but 2 games off the list right here. We've got Blast Corps right there, and then down towards the bottom, we've got Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. So far, we've got 5 games, but we're only about halfway through this convention, so let's see if we can find anything else. Next up was this booth where they ended up having a ton of different Nintendo 64 games, and this is the booth from Eric Mers, who put on the Oklahoma Gaming Frenzy, this game convention. And honestly, I wanted to find something on my list here, and I dug and I dug and I dug. And unfortunately, while I made my way through this, I did not find anything that was on the list here. However, I may have dug through this the whole time and ended up finding something that I didn't have in my Nintendo 64 collection. So since we're here, I might as well buy a game, right? And that ended up being Penny Racers for the Nintendo 64. Honestly, I knew that it was Eric's booth, and I wanted to dig through and see if I could find something to buy from him, and that is when I found Penny Racers for 22 bucks. I don't actually have this game, so of course, this was a no-brainer. I was going to support Eric and pick this up, and it's a game that I don't have. So let's kind of go back to the game convention and try to stick to our list a little bit better. And then I made my way over to the Yesterplay Collectibles booth where they had a box Star Fox 64 here, and then I kind of looked a little bit more. And then they said, hey, come look at this, and showed me a Zelda Ocarina of Time sealed and graded 9.6, which is absolutely insane. Then I made my way over to this corner of their booth here, and that's when I ended up picking up Mia Hamm's Soccer, which is a game that I absolutely loved as a kid and is highly underrated. And then I made my way to their other glass case where I ended up grabbing Pokemon Snap. So 2 for 1 at this booth, which was totally awesome. I gotta talk about these games. Obviously, you probably know about Pokemon Snap. It's a ton of fun and a game that I love to revisit. And then we've got Mia Hamm's Soccer, which as a kid, for some reason, when I went into Toys R Us, I ended up grabbing this game. I have no clue why, but I absolutely ended up loving this game. It's a pretty basic soccer game, but for whatever reason, I enjoy it and I'm actually good at it. So we've got to mark it off the list. And I know Mia Hamm's Soccer is a weird one to have on this list, but it was one that I thought about, and I'm so glad that I ended up finding it, so we can cross that off. And right across the way here, you could see was Pokemon Snap. So we've only got about 5 games left to try to find. So let's see if we can find like 1 or 2 of these before the end of the convention. And that led me to this booth where I saw a glass case, nothing crazy here. But then they had a bunch of Nintendo 64 games over here. And that's when I ended up finding Excitebike 64. This game is a ton of fun, and I absolutely love it. You can actually even play the original Excitebike on it, which I thought was awesome as a kid. And then I made my way to this booth where they ended up having a bunch of Nintendo 64 games kind of 3D printed on these stands, which I thought was pretty cool. But honestly, nothing here that was on my list. So I continued on to this booth where they ended up having one game that I've definitely been wanting to get, and that was Zelda Ocarina of Time. I ended up grabbing this, which was totally perfect. So overall, we kind of ended this kind of game hunting at this convention with a banger, actually. Starting off, obviously, you saw Excitebike 64, but the banger was Ocarina of Time Zelda. Obviously, a ton of fun. Both of these games were games that I really enjoyed as a kid. This was like the first game that was just like next level for me. So it holds a special place in my heart. But also, there's a place for it on this list. So we're going to go ahead and cross off Excitebike there and Zelda Ocarina of Time, which unfortunately ends here with some games that we didn't end up picking up, being Donkey Kong 64, which is actually the first Nintendo 64 game I played. Mario 64. Obviously, I didn't find it anywhere that was a good price or decent, so I didn't end up picking it up. And then I never ended up finding Monster Truck Madness, which is kind of a bummer because that game is a ton of fun and great multiplayer game that often gets overlooked, even though the racing's not very good. But so far, so good. I made my way to the Oklahoma Gaming Frenzy with a list full of games that I wanted to pick up, and honestly, I feel like we did pretty good. Picking up 9 out of the 12, plus the penny racers, I think makes up for some of the games that we didn't miss out here. But what would you put as your list of childhood Nintendo 64 games? I want to know what you think. Comment down below and let me know. But I'm getting out of here because I've got to clean and test these games. So check out that video out right there if you haven't already. But overall, I think I'm pretty happy by picking up all of these games. These were some games that were, for the most part, cheap, but there were some more expensive games and some games that I picked up that I feel like a lot of people would probably pass on. But enough about that. I've got to get out of here, so check out that video out if you haven't already.